fall camp is officially underway in Iowa City. We talk about the biggest needs for Iowa during August, plus our reaction from the first couple of games for Luka Garza and Joe Wieskamp during NBA Summer League, and much more. This is week 169 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. This is from the Hawkeye of the Storm.
Are you a Hawkeye fan living in Story County? Do you feel isolated, like you're alone in a maze of red? Well, you're not the only one. And that's why we here at StoryCounty.news have launched a brand new section of our website, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, which will feature our weekly podcast, Brada's Branded Thoughts, as well as other Hawkeye-related content for all you Story County residents who bleed black and gold, or if you live in Western Iowa, Eastern Iowa, or somewhere else other than Ames and you're a Hawkeye fan, we'd love your support. All of our content is free, so again, give our Facebook page a follow, give it a like, and give our Twitter page a follow as well, at From the Hawkeye on Twitter. The more likes, the more follows, the more support we get, the more content we can continue to push out, and it's all free. It's From the Hawkeye of the Storm, hosted by StoryCounty.news, for the best Hawkeye content in the area.
Week 169 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. We are with you on August 11th. We are recording this late in the evening on a Wednesday, and we are getting closer and closer to the start of fall football for Iowa and college football across the country. And what a year it's going to be. Of course, COVID changed things so much across the landscape last year, not just for Iowa, but the entire Big Ten and really the entire country. Some conferences, as we know, were affected more than others, some in just different ways. But we are just weeks away. September, 4th is the first game against Indiana. And lots to talk about, of course. But today we're going to be looking specifically at Iowa's needs during fall camp. We've seen some early photos being released from the University of Iowa of some not game action, I should say, but practice action. And not a whole lot we can grasp from those photos, but we do know some of Iowa's largest concerns or biggest needs heading into fall camp. So we'll talk about that briefly. First, I want to recap what has happened in the world of Iowa basketball as it relates to two former Iowa players hitting the next level. We talked about it last week on the podcast. Joe Wieskamp and Luka Garza both getting a shot at the next level. Luka Garza with the Detroit Pistons, and of course Joe Wieskamp with San Antonio Spurs. And we've kind of had a mixed bag early on. If you've seen the first couple of games for both players, Luka Garza got a bit exposed defensively, as we kind of expected him to at times in that first game against the Thunder, but really showed up yesterday. Had a beautiful Dirk Nowitzki-like fadeaway that kind of went viral on social media afterwards. So let's look at the box scores first of all for Luka. If you take a look at Luka Garza, game 1 against the Thunder, he played 13 minutes, was 3 of 5 from the field, had a 33% percentage from outside, was 2 of 4 from the free throw line. That is going to be an ongoing concern for Luka as well. We know the knocks on Luka's game are his lack of athleticism, and partially related to that, his lack of defense. And I think free throws are the biggest thing, and I'm surprised, and of course this is a small sample size, but if these numbers don't improve, if he doesn't improve from 50% from the line, I am very surprised by that. Unless Frank Garza and Luka know something I don't know. I'm not sure why more time wasn't spent on that, and if it was, why is he still struggling from the free throw line? So that's something to monitor going forward. He did have 4 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 turnover. I don't really typically pay too much attention to the plus-minus number for individual players, especially at the NBA level. There's so much that goes into very offensive scores, which, you know, if you look at the score from this game against the Thunder, what did we have? Let's see, 76-72. Of course, these are abbreviated quarters, But this is an offensive league that we live in, or that we observe, I should say, and that these players are taking part in. And it just kind of changes the framework, at least from my point of view, of the plus-minus stat. I just don't read into it quite as much as I would for college basketball, and I think even more so high school basketball. And I'm not going to go into exactly why that is from a statistics standpoint, but I just don't read into that too much. I think he was sitting at -4. But again, the Pistons are not a very good team right now. Even their summer league team is struggling despite Cade Cunningham. And Cade really didn't do a whole lot. I mean, he had 12 points. He was 5 of 17 from the field. These are the early goings for these guys. Tyler Cook, I thought, struggled as well. He was 4 of 8. Did have 11 points, so, one of 3 guys to hit double figures. I just thought Tyler played sloppy, had 3 turnovers, which was tied for second on the team. And I think he can do better than 5 rebounds. I saw a lot of plays where Tyler Cook, to me, and again, I'm going from watching Game 1 and Game 2 now for the Pistons. I feel like Tyler Cook kind of plays lazy, and I don't mean to knock him, but I'm also not going to sugarcoat it. I watch him play, and I kind of feel the same way I did when he was at Iowa. I've heard nothing but great things about Tyler Cook. I don't know Tyler personally, but the coaching staff has had nothing but good things to say about him. The media has had nothing but good things to say about him as a person. But I watch his athletic ability, and I see him only nab 5 boards, meanwhile Saddiq Bey has 12, Killian Hayes has 9, Cade Cunningham has 6, and yet Tyler was second on the team in total minutes played. He's got to rebound the ball better. To me, there's no excuse for it. I said the same thing at Iowa. He should have been putting up the type of numbers, at least from a rebounding perspective, that Luka Garza did his junior and senior seasons, and he just never did. Wasn't real impressed with Tyler Cook's performance. Wasn't real impressed with Luka's performance, to be completely honest. There were a couple defensive moments in the game, if you will, for Luka that sort of exposed him for what he is. He's a big guy that has lost weight and has probably bettered his agility, but at the same time, he's just never going to be a guy who's going to be comfortable guarding on the wing or on the perimeter. He's just not going to be, and that's just the reality of it. And I think if he's going to work his way onto a roster spot, he's going to do it the way I've been saying he's going to do it this entire time, and it's simply because of his knack at putting the ball in the basket and his motor. I mean, give him credit. He can't really do much about natural athletic ability and foot speed. There are a lot of criticisms that can be made, and I've made them right here in the podcast, about Fran McCaffery's schematics defensively at Iowa. I don't think the Iowa coaching staff is very good at all developing Iowa players defensively. And again, not knocking him for it. That's just, if you look at the numbers bear that out. All right. But as far as Luka is concerned, there's some things that you can't blame the coaching staff at Iowa for. It's just who he is. I mean, he is what he is. He's a hardworking, good attitude on the young man, but it is what it is. He's not going to be able to guard on the outside, so you're going to have to live with that if you're an NBA team. Can you retain him? Can you give up a roster spot for a guy who's going to be a liability when he's pulled from the paint? Now, I thought he played okay defensively inside. I think he's probably worked on that, but there's only so much you can do to work on agility, especially as it relates to athleticism. Game 2, the Pistons played the Rockets. Tyler Cook actually had one of the better plus-minuses in this game. Looking down through the stats, he was the only player with a +5. So, attaboy Tyler. Still just 6 rebounds. Think he can do better than that. He was 4 of 4 from the free throw line. That's something that Luka could certainly learn from, I think. And 3 of 4 from the field. I thought Tyler played better, but his minutes were reduced in this game. I'm not saying that's an indication of anything. Of course, you're going to be trying to test the younger guys more. Luka played 16 minutes more than Tyler. I shouldn't say 16 minutes more. He played 16 minutes about 3 minutes more than Tyler did in this game. And Luka was 5 of 6 from the field, 1 of 2 from 3, and 4 of 4 from the free throw line. So the free throws were not an issue yesterday. We'll monitor that. Again, way too small of a sample size. I was concerned after watching game 1 with just how he was missing his free throws, but we'll see. I think the verdict is still out there. Just 3 rebounds for Luka. Again, that's going to have to be better if he's going to deserve a roster spot, but he was the second leading scorer at 15 points, and again, he only put up 6 shots. So a very efficient night for Luka. Again, he had the Dirk fadeaway that everybody was oohing and eyeing over. So a good showing for Luka Garza. I think a solid showing for Tyler Cook, who ended up with 10 points. I think a long way to go. I still feel about the way I did when Luka was drafted by Detroit. I think he's got an excellent chance of making the roster. Tyler Cook was cut by Detroit, but is competing for a spot on the Summer League roster, which really isn't a surprise. Don't know that he'll have a spot moving forward, but who's to say Luka will have a spot? We just don't know. A lot of moving parts here, and I think Killian Hayes, if there's one guy, if you're watching the Pistons, he really stood out in that first game. Struggled, though, in the second game. There's going to be a lot of that inconsistency. And you look at Cade Cunningham, he was 8 of 18 in game 2. I mean, he has not been good offensively. He was 4 of 9 from 3, so he had 20 points. But just kind of up and down, and he's going to have to learn the ropes at the next level. Saddiq Bey is going to get a roster spot. I think we know that. And again, this is not a Pistons podcast, so we're not here to break down the ins and outs of every Pistons game. But I think so far, Tyler Cook and Luka Garza are kind of at even par, if you will. I think both have to make some movement in order to have a shot at making the roster. Even though Luka was drafted, it does not guarantee, as we know, it does not guarantee a roster spot. Just talk to Aaron White, former Iowa forward, about that. He was drafted by the Wizards years ago and never has seen a single second on an NBA roster. So let's take a look at Joe Wieskamp and the Spurs. First of all, the first game with San Antonio was against the Minnesota Timberwolves, and Wieskamp played 16 minutes off the bench. Was 1 of 1 from the field. Really, it's interesting. You look at that number, and he was one of the first guys off the bench, and you think, well, why did he only take 1 shot? If you watch that game back, I thought Wieskamp played a little tentative, but at the same time, he didn't force anything. That's a good sign moving forward for Joe, and I think that's just kind of the type of player he is. Never really was that forceful on the offensive end, and sometimes he probably needed to be at Iowa, but he's going to have to learn, and I think he knows. I think he understands the principle of waiting your turn and not forcing it. So again, 16 solid minutes for Joe, just 3 points, had 1 turnover. He's going to have to get on the boards more as well, I think, with his size at 6'6", playing that 3 spot. You're going to probably have to rebound better than he did in game 1. But looking at game 2, I think Joe played a lot better. First of all, he started, which was a good sign for Joe Wieskamp. He was 3 of 9 from the field, but here's why I like what he did in game 2. 3 of 3 from the field, 5 boards, had 2 steals, 2 assists, 1 steal, 1 block. Did have 1 turn, but he's a guy, again, he's going to be a 3-and-D guy in the NBA if he's going to make it, and he's going to have to kind of sprinkle in the box score, the stat sheet, if you will, in order for him to deserve a roster spot. Because, again, he's limited, just like Luka, in different ways. He's not going to be a guy who, although he was impressive at the NBA Combine, he's not going to, dunk over you. He's not going to be a guy who's probably going to be, take it to the rack guy. He's just never really became that at Iowa. I think a lot of people thought he could have been a guy who could have been more aggressive driving the basketball, but just never was. So he's going to have to be able to chip in here and there in different parts of the stat sheet, and ended up with 11 points, one of just 4 guys in double figures. Now, if you look at the plus and minus, he actually had the worst plus minus on the entire Pistons box score, which, again, I don't read a whole lot into that, especially in Summer League. I just don't. but he was minus 22. But again, one turnover in this game. He was a little bit more aggressive offensively, shot 7 threes. Would not be surprised if the Pistons coaching staff said, hey, we drafted you because you can let it fly, let it rain, and we need to see you actually do that. And so he did take 7 shots. That's a good sign from him. But again, that first game is proof that Joe Wieskamp is not going to be forcing shots up. And that's only good moving forward for his chances to make the Spurs roster. So very early, of course, a lot of Summer League ball still to be played. Of course, we'll follow it here from the Hawkeye of the Storm and kind of give you our breakdown as Summer League continues. And of course, when those final roster spots, those selections are made by each franchise, we will talk about it right here at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Let's transition to football now. As I mentioned in our preview, summer camp, or I should say fall camp, it's fall camp now, is upon us at Iowa and all across the country. And, you know, it's interesting, Iowa, we know that spring ball is always very important for development. And certainly some of the guys that got here early, like Arlen Bruce, Keegan Johnson, I'm missing a couple guys in there. I think David Koff, he enrolled early as well. Some of those freshmen that enrolled early certainly have a head start on the new enrollees, but fall camp's a lot about development as well, especially with chemistry. I think offensively, the biggest things I look for with Iowa fall camp is quarterback competition, because although I think we all agree Spencer Petras is going to be the starter week 1, he's going to get better with pressure behind him. And if he doesn't, maybe he's not the man for the job. We know where he struggled last year, struggled with accuracy, really struggled dialing in the fastball. Basically every pass was a fastball for Spencer Petras. But he got better as the season went on. Didn't look great in spring, but again, we just got a couple glimpses into spring ball. And I think the second game was a really windy day, so not to make excuses for Spencer, but there's a lot of things to watch. And so you'll see that as we go through my top fall camp needs, you're going to see a theme that I do sort of prioritize offensive development in the fall. And a lot of that has to do with an opportunity for, I think, younger skill position players that are on the offensive side of the ball, needing to develop chemistry with guys like Petras, and for Petras, again, to be able to be pushed by these other quarterbacks who are trying desperately to make a case for QB1. So let's go through these top fall camp needs. Number 1, and I'm not going to surprise anybody with this one, it is the development and the competition behind Spencer Petras. Again, Petras struggled early last year. We know his struggles against Northwestern. Iowa loses a 17-0 lead against the Wildcats. Didn't play well at all against Purdue. Really didn't play well against Minnesota. Didn't play well against Michigan State. Against Penn State, he was better at times, but the second half, he really didn't play well either. The running game really carried Iowa last year. We know that. Will the running game be able to do the same? We don't know, but he's got to develop even more so this fall camp, regardless of the progress he made over the spring, and we continue to hear that from Iowa receivers and the coaching staff that Spencer really turned a corner. Obviously, we don't know that yet. I mean, we're going to have to wait and see on that one. But again, not only has he got to develop some fixes to his own game, but you look at who's behind him. Deuce Hogan, Joey Labus, I believe, is his last name. And then, of course, Alex Padilla, who we recognize at this point to probably be the favorite for QB2. Can those guys continue to develop themselves to a point where Spencer Petras has to get better? And I'm not saying he hasn't gotten better, but can they push him to where he recognizes the need? Because, look, if a quarterback can't handle pressure and competition, then, again, probably not the guy you want at the helm. And let me just put in a plug for Spencer Petras. Everything we've heard about him and everything we've observed of him off the field in interviews with the media, he's a very mature young man and certainly a guy who is confident. I thought he looked uncomfortable last year, but I don't think that's necessarily a lack of confidence. He does have a swagger about him. We have to admit that. I think he is aware of he's obviously aware of what he needs to do better. Famous QB guru out east worked with him this offseason. So he's a guy who understands where he needs to improve. But again, looked uncomfortable last year. So he's going to have to be pushed. And I think the development of Alex Padilla, Deuce Hogan, Joey Labus, those guys are going to have to push Petrus. And I think fall camp, August, can be an excellent opportunity for those guys. Labus just got here, was not an early enrollee, so he'll have an opportunity to compete at the quarterback position as well. Number 2, depth at running back. Now, why am I picking out running back? Well, again, I typically prioritize offensive development in the fall. A lot of times with skill position players. Really, even into recent years with guys like Amir Smith-Marset, who really came on strong in early 2017. Brandon Smith got time as a true freshman, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was playing as a true freshman. Didn't play great, but was in there for blocking purposes and for development. I think skill position players typically have an opportunity to begin to make more plays as they develop more chemistry with Spencer Petras, which now that they've had an entire spring, if you're able to do that, and so now we can actually make strides in other areas. And running back is just a position where typically Iowa has issues retaining healthy players. We know the stories of the many running backs that have struggled with injuries, and that's kind of the case across the country. It seemed like for a while Iowa had a curse on it as far as running backs are concerned. Joel Hampton, Mikhail McCall. You can go down the list. It's a laundry list of examples where Iowa running backs get hurt either in fall camp or early in the season, and it kind of derails things. So depth is important. You've got to have depth. I think it is a question on this team. I'm not real concerned about it at this point. Tyler Goodson has seemed rather durable throughout his time at Iowa thus far. But Ivory Kelly-Martin, who we kind of perceive as the RB2 right now, has struggled with injuries. So who's behind Tyler Goodson? Goodson's not carrying the ball 30, 35 times a game. That's just not happening. So who's behind Tyler Goodson right now if you want to be able to carry the ball that many times? It's probably a Gavin Williams. Maybe it's a true freshman. We'll get to one of the true freshmen that I have my eye on this fall in a moment. But there's going to have to be some work there. And certainly this goes into my number 5, my 5th most important thing, or top camp need for Iowa as well. But that brings us to number 3, and that is development of newly enrolled players. If you look at some of the early enrollees at Iowa, Keegan Johnson, Arlen Bruce, we mentioned David Davidkoff, another guy who for Iowa could maybe see the field early. The offensive line did take a couple of hits. Mark Kallenberger, no longer with the team. Coy Cronk is trying to make an NFL roster spot. They lost some pieces at offensive line. So, guys like David Cobb are going to have to develop. But also, again, these not early enrollees, but the newly enrollees, Michael Mislinski being a guy who, maybe could begin to be, we don't know. This is all speculation at this point, but maybe he's a guy who can develop and deserve some snaps in a game at some point. And again, of course, true freshmen can play up to 4 games and retain their eligibility. Bo Stevens is a big guy, 300 pounds listed according to the University of Iowa as a true freshman. Maybe he's a guy who can come in and spell some minutes as well, or spell some snaps. But I think, again, going back to skill position players, as far as newly enrolled players, Devin Hilson's a guy who Iowa fans should be keeping their eye on. I believe it was this past spring, speaking with our good friend Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, we talked about Devin Hilson, a guy who, coming out of Des Moines North, who hasn't really, I don't think Des Moines North has produced a D1 football player in decades. He's a guy who did not enroll early, but it's sort of a big guy. He's 192 pounds at 6'1". I wouldn't be shocked to see Devin Hilson work his way into at least the conversation of being involved in special teams. And as you know, if you're an Iowa fan, special teams is the route to playing time as an underclassman. So Devin Hilson is going to have to develop. And then another guy that I'm really looking forward to watching is Brody Brecht. I mean, here's a guy from Ankeny who looked like might actually choose baseball over football. Will be playing two sports at Iowa, but decided to come here and play football. He fits the mold of what Iowa needs. 6'4", 205 pounds. Certainly, we don't suspect that he has quite the physical attributes that a Brandon Smith had last year, but Iowa needs that X-type receiver. I've been preaching that all summer and spring. They need somebody to emerge there. Keegan Johnson might be the best applicant, but he's 6'1", 197. He is not Brandon Smith. And if you look up and down the roster, in fact, let's zero in on wide receivers here. You've got Keegan Johnson at 6'1". You got Arlen Bruce at 5'10". You've got Deontay Vines, who, redshirt freshman, heard some rumblings that he's making some progress, but again, 6'0", or 6'0". Quavon Matthews is 5'11". Jackson Ritter's a big guy, but does he make a step forward? Desmond Hudson's been the guy that I've kind of had my eye on all year. I think that he's the guy that they need to really develop, and hopefully Desmond has made some strides. Tyrone Tracy's not going to be playing. I guess he can play the X position, but I don't want him trying to catch fades in the back of the end zone. Nico Reganey, same thing. Charlie Jones is 6 foot. Max Cooper is 6 foot. They got lots of slot guys. And they've got lots of guys who can run. Max Cooper, I believe, was a track athlete in high school. He's certainly a guy who can run. We know Charlie Jones is great at kickoff returns and punt returns. Nico Reganey, solid hands. Tyrone Tracy can run. They need a guy who can get up and make a catch in the back of the end zone, similar to what we saw from Brandon Smith last year. Now, maybe a guy like Sam Laporta can become more of that red zone target for Iowa. But again, not a lot of depth at tight end right now that we know of. So I just think those two guys, again, Desmond Hudson, but as far as the recent enrollee, Brody Brecht, I don't know if, where Brody is at physically, or certainly in the minds of the coaching staff. It is hard, I'm sure, for a guy like Brody to be able to come in and immediately at a position where there are a lot of guys, but be able to kind of find his niche as a bigger guy. You've got to think that the coaching staff has made that clear to him that, hey, if you can develop, we can use you fairly early. And again, can he get to a point where he's playing on special teams, contributing in a different way? And certainly that would help his chances of getting in on the offensive side as well. All right, moving to my fourth camp need for Iowa, and that is the defensive line. It's got to prepare for these multi-purpose quarterbacks early in the season. Remember who Iowa State and Indiana throw to the forefront at quarterback. Think about Iowa State. Brock Purdy, a seasoned veteran now at Iowa State, a guy who Iowa State fans, we're recording this here in Ames from the Hawkeye of the Storm. We are more than familiar with Iowa State fans' frustration over recent years with Brock Purdy sometimes not running as much as they'd like to see him run. This is Brock Purdy's last go-around. I think he's going to let it ride. And Iowa has had a history, more so probably closer to 2008 to 2012 period of Kirk Ferentz's tenure here at Iowa, where Iowa sort of had issues with the mobile quarterbacks. Iowa's kind of always had issues with mobile quarterbacks. I think in recent years, Kelvin Bell and Phil Parker have kind of figured out that, hey, we got to have 7-8 defensive linemen to be able to counteract against quarterbacks like a Brock Purdy, who can make plays with his arm, but can certainly make plays with his feet as well. And I want to pull up here the Indiana depth chart, because it sounds like, again, these are kind of reports that we're hearing. It sounds like Michael Penix is going to play week 1. He's coming off the torn ACL. And yeah, he's the dual threat guy for Indiana. So it'll change. It looks like Jack Tuttle. I'm not seeing anybody other than Tuttle listed right now, at least as according to our lads at backup quarterback. So Jack Tuttle is more of a pro style guy. But if Penix plays, he is a dual threat quarterback. Certainly a guy with a good arm, made a lot of plays last year. I think the Ohio State-Indiana game, if you forgot what happened in that game, go back and watch Ohio State-Indiana. That was a dogfight against one of the best teams in the country, probably the second best team in the country if you look at the playoff in Ohio State. So Iowa's got two quarterbacks right out of the bat who are both dual threat guys who can beat you with their arms, guys who can beat you with their feet. They're both seasoned veterans. Michael Penix is a redshirt junior. These guys are not going to be fazed by the moment. It's good that Iowa has a home game, but this defensive line is going to have to be ready for these dual threat quarterbacks. A lot of it falls on the coaching staff. Let's take a look at what Iowa has at defensive line. Certainly, I think we're going to see a lot of Joe Evans. Y.A. Black is a guy who I think he was banged up this spring. He fits the mold. 6'5", 287. He's listed at 287 now. That is a big boy. And if he can develop, or if he has developed and he's healthy, certainly could help Iowa on the interior. Lucas Van Ness, another guy we've heard good things about. Logan Jones, Logan Lee, Chris Reams. Talk about a big guy, 6'7", maybe the next Matt Nelson type of defensive lineman at Iowa. John Wagner, Noah Shannon, Zach Van Valkenburg. They've got lots of bodies, but have these guys developed enough? I think, obviously, if you look at the depth chart, and just from what we know as far as experience, the four guys that are going to start are Joe Evans, Zach Van Valkenburg, John Wagner, and Y.A. Black. But, Y.A. Black doesn't have a whole lot of experience. We really don't know his health. We assume he's back full go. But, Logan Jones is going to work his way, I think, into the rotation there, and they need him to. Logan Lee is probably going to have to do the same. Chris Reams. They're going to need 7 or 8 guys to be successful, I think, against guys like Penix and Purdy. And again, you don't have an Illinois State coming to town. You don't have, even the Wyoming game a couple of years ago. Yes, it was Josh Allen, but Josh Allen is not a guy who's typically going to beat you with his feet. He's very athletic, was compared to Ben Roethlisberger at times, but not a guy who's going to test you in that way. So Iowa needs to really focus now that they can assume they've got healthy players, because they were really banged up everywhere during the spring. The defensive line is really going to have to develop in order for Iowa to be able to counteract those multi-purpose quarterbacks that you're going to get weeks 1 and 2. And this leads us to the 5th and final key for Iowa this fall camp. The biggest need in fall camp, or I should say the 5th biggest need for Iowa during fall camp, and that is just to stay healthy. I know that's kind of stating the obvious, but Iowa has, just like any other team, has had its fair share over the years of players that get banged up during fall camp. I think back to the broken foot of Matt Vandenberg. They've had other guys that have got banged out. Again, we mentioned running back is a big key. And we're not going to talk about our most indispensable players on this podcast. Maybe we can talk about that as we get closer to the season as well. But I think we know who those players are. Tyler Goodson's going to be at the top of that list. I think Sam Laporta has to be near the top, because we don't know anything about Sam's backups, really. Luke Lachey, maybe. Josiah Meeman, perhaps Elijah Yelverton, and, of course, Spencer Petras. It's just going to be an interesting few weeks. You just hope that we don't hear anything. And listen, Kirk is going to be very hush-hush about injuries, as he should be. COVID is still here. I wish people would get vaccinated. I'm not going to go on a rant about that. It's everybody's choice. But certainly the vaccine is working for people who have chosen to get it. So if you haven't gotten it yet, if you're able to medically, I encourage you to. The more people get vaccinated, the quicker we can get back to not having restrictions and not having to deal with masks and whatnot. But in the meantime, we deal with what we have. But it's going to be a fun fall. If you missed our previous shows, or you haven't listened to Mark Rogers over at the Voice of College Football recently, we are going to have post-game shows after every Iowa football game right here if you're listening through the Voice of College Football channel, if you're listening to this podcast through From the Hawkeye of the Storm, go ahead and subscribe to our channel here at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. But also swing over to Iowa at the Voice of College Football. That's Iowa at the Voice of CFB. And subscribe, because we're going to have live post-game shows which will include your comments, your chats, and your questions, your observations from Iowa's games. Again, every single Saturday. And we're going to be joined by an Iowa coaching legend in Don Patterson, former Hayden Fry assistant. So it's going to be a great time. Don is such a knowledgeable guy, such a nice guy, and certainly knows Hawkeye football like the back of his hand. So it's going to be a fun time. But again, if you have not subscribed, we're going to continue to talk about this because I'm excited about it. I hope our listeners are excited about it. I hope Mark Rogers' Iowa listeners are excited about it. So we're going to continue to promote this post-game show that we're going to have again each and every Saturday over at the Voice of College Football, Iowa at the Voice of College Football. Thank you for listening to week 169 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. We will talk to you soon, where we'll break down the schedule, we'll break down the roster, the depth chart, even more than we already have. Iowa football is right around the corner. We'll talk to you soon. Go Hawks.